All right, what's up, everyone? Welcome to the Cardinal Rule Live TCR Live with my special guest today, Brack and Clancy. Clancy's at Clancy Corner, Alex Clancy from the Locked On Cardinals Daily Arizona Cardinals podcast. Thanks for joining us, guys.
Thanks for having us, Joseph.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, definitely appreciate it. I enjoy your podcast, and folks that are part of my audience. My video, I do more like short videos that are kind of deeper dives. And for Cardinals fans who want their daily fix of Arizona Cardinals content, you guys are a great place to go. You guys do stuff every weekday. When I can catch you live, I try to do that. I've put your links in the description for the video, so folks should check you guys out for daily content, and then come to me for some of the deeper dive stuff that I like to do. All right, well, why don't you guys real quick just introduce yourself, tell my audience, who you are, how you got into this. Obviously, I told them a little bit about your podcast, and then we'll jump into talking about position groups.
Yeah, sure, man. We appreciate you guys having us on, you having us on here on the Cardinal Rule. Really appreciate it. I've been covering sports in Phoenix for over 10 years, working over at iHeartRadio, Fox Sports, KGME, co-host the show. Alex and I have a very similar path, and just been doing it, covering it on that side of things, being a sports reporter, going in each practices and games. And once Alex started doing the Locked On Cardinals podcast, I heard his takes. I'm like, man, somebody's got to bring some logic to this thing. Somebody's got to slow this guy down. And luckily, he invited me onto the show one time. It was the 2018 season. And, I think you can know why Alex needed some help during that year. It was brutal. There wasn't a whole lot to talk about except how bad the Cardinals were. And we started it then, and it's been a blast ever since. And it's been fun to kind of see this thing, them take this out of the doldrums of being in the cellar of the NFL and then kind of work their way up 3 wins, 5 wins, 8 wins now. The Kyler Murray era began, and it's just fun to talk ball. It's fun to talk Cardinals football and kind of build this thing along with the Red Sea, because I think we're really just kind of scratching the surface as a football town.
Yeah, our paths are similar, Joseph, but I deserved my path and he was given his. So I think that's the big difference. One thing for Cardinals fans, the man who gave me my start was Kwame Lassiter, longtime Cardinals player, now no longer with us. One of the best people I've ever met in my life. And he gave me a chance. I had never been behind a microphone before, and I moved out to Arizona for the chance. I ended up being on his show on this smaller station for 4 years. Went through NBC Sports, and then Bo and I both reported traffic for iHeartMedia. True story. I was terrible at it, so they moved me away from it. And both with Fox Sports 910, and now he's still with iHeart, and I'm doing this and doing other things on the side. And it's we give a fun take and not a well, I have to say this, so this is what we're going to say. If we piss people off, we piss people off, and people like us, so they follow us. It's kind of the Howard Stern effect. It's like, people don't like Howard Stern, they watch more because they want to see what he has to say next. We're not in that, obviously that far off.
Jeez, yeah, flatter yourself a little bit with this.
No, I'm just saying it's a thing. Like you say a lot of terrible things. No, we have a good time together, and we talk Cardinals, and it's couldn't be better.
That's awesome. Yeah, I one of the comments I've seen on my videos is probably similar sentiment that people watch you probably feel, is that they appreciate takes that aren't, shall we say, sanctioned by the organization, right? That don't come from people who work for the Cardinals organization, that can kind of say things that might, be a little more polarizing or a little more controversial, or at least not the company line, so to speak. So, well, great. I appreciate hearing your stories. My path is very different. I don't do this full time. As I mentioned y'all before, I'm a university professor, and this is something I'm doing for fun on the side because I love the Cardinals and have loved them forever. And as you can probably tell from the beard, I'm a little older, so I actually remember when the Cardinals came to Arizona and been watching them ever since. So the thing we're going to talk about today, and I pitched this to Bo a couple weeks ago. When I messaged you about this, was to talk about the position groups in the NFC West. And it's been kind of interesting, it's lined up well because you all talked about that recently. And, just as a coincidence, separate from the fact that I, had kind of suggested this, So you all talked a little more about, I think, some of the individual players, and we'll get into that a little bit, but I think I want to talk a little more about the whole position groups, so to speak, and talking about the depth. And I know you all touched on that a little bit. So, that's what we're going to talk about today. And then, if, towards the end, if we have time, there's some question and answer, if you all don't mind, if you're up for sticking around for that from anyone who's here in the live stream, they usually have some pretty good questions. So let's jump right into it. Now, first thing we're going to talk about is quarterbacks. Now, I think this is one position where you don't really look at the position group so much. If you're having to rely on that backup, something's gone wrong. So this is a little more obviously heavily weighted towards the starter. But as my guest, I'll let you all kind of start with how you rank these the quarterbacks in the division. This one's probably pretty straightforward, but what are your thoughts in terms of 1 through 4 quarterbacks in the NFC West?
I mean, logically you can't put Kyler Murray ahead of Russell Wilson. I know that Russell Wilson still had he had kind of had his downfall at the end of last year. He had his comments this offseason, but look, Kyler Murray's absolutely on the rise, but I can't rank him any higher than 2, and that's where I'm going to actually rank Kyler. I'm not buying in on the Matthew Stafford hype train. This is a guy that hasn't won a playoff game. He's got the same amount of Pro Bowls as Kyler Murray, and he's been in the league for 9 seasons. I don't understand it. When you look at their passing statistics, they're very similar. And if you look at the receivers that Matthew Stafford was surrounded by last year, sure, he didn't have DeAndre Hopkins, but he had a better receiving core than Kyler Murray was playing with all season long. And the Lions were chasing points all year long. So when you look at the stats and they're very similar, and then you take into account Kyler's ability to run the football, I'm taking Kyler Murray over Matthew Stafford 10 times out of 10. And then you look at the bottom of the division, and it's not. I think Jimmy G's serviceable. I think he's he could bounce back, but still, this is a tough division with Russell and Kyler. And then you've got, we'll see what happens with Trey Lance. But I like Kyler Murray to continue his rise, and I think he could certainly vie at this point. You're just looking at the trajectory of their careers and where Kyler is at his age and where Russell Wilson is now. I mean, we could see him overtake him soon.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think, and I've said this a lot on the podcast, that Kyler Murray will win in spite of Cliff Kingsbury. It's kind of a wing clipping situation as opposed to what Sean McVay did for Jared Goff. Obviously, a different situation now. The floor is highest for Russell Wilson. He has some Kyler Murray in Dallas games, 9 for 25 and a W. They win 10 games a year. That's what Seattle does. And Russell Wilson is the sole proprietor of getting all the credit for that, regardless of how good the defense was early on. Russell Wilson makes 3 throws in one drive, and they win a game, and it's because of Russell Wilson. And the defense has been porous. The offensive line's been porous the last couple seasons up till last year when they traded for Jamal Adams and Carlos Dunlap. But, yeah, I'd put him at 2. Until Matthew Stafford can prove that he could be the puppet that Sean McVay wants him to be, he's going to be 3rd. Or Sean McVay is going to be like, maybe this isn't working. Maybe I shouldn't be talking to my quarterback's ear up until 15 seconds left on the play clock. But at this point, I would put Kyler at 2A and Stafford at 2B. I don't think it's fair to solidify Kyler ahead of him because Kyler ain't won nothing either. So Matthew Stafford is more established. Kyler is a baby compared to the other 3 guys, and he's on the rise, as Bo mentioned. I would say 2A, 2B, but I would put Kyler slightly ahead.
Yeah, I think I agree with both of you. This is probably the first and last time we'll be completely aligned with all of our ranks. Maybe, Russell Wilson. What to me is really interesting is over the years there's been a number of iterations of the Seahawks team in terms of how the roster has been constructed. They've had teams with really great defenses and makeshift receivers, and then a good running game, and then they've gone differently. Now now that they've had to pay Russ and can't rely on that really strong roster around him as much, the defense isn't as strong, and he's winning in whatever version of the Seahawks they throw out there. And usually with patchwork offensive lines, up until recently, they probably have the best offensive line they've had in his time with Dwayne Brown. But for years, they just took backup tight ends and turned them into left tackles and random stuff, and just coached them up and trusted that Wilson could make it work, right? And that's to your point, Alex, that whatever version of a roster they threw out there, he's made it work and made it work at a high level. So Russell Wilson has to be number one. I agree with you. Kyler right now I put as number two. And the whole Matthew Stafford thing is kind of interesting because, the thought process is, okay, Goff isn't that great. He's a system quarterback. Look what, they've done with him. And then you give them a better quarterback. That's the rationale. Then they're going to blossom. But we're not sure that's the reality yet, right? I mean, everyone believes McVay is a great coach, and everyone believes Goff's a system quarterback who won't do well elsewhere. But we haven't seen him elsewhere. I mean, he's limited. But we don't know that the Stafford experiment is going to be the gangbusters, right? So I think we have to see what's going to happen, and until that happens, I'm with you. I trust Kyler Murray, and and he also has a high floor, right, with his rushing ability, and that helps out a lot. And obviously, San Francisco, we'll see. Maybe in a couple of years, Trey Lance is that guy. But right now, we've seen, I think, what Jimmy G can be when he's healthy, and that's part of the problem, that he's not healthy often. They can win with poor quarterback play, but if we're ranking the quarterbacks, I'm with you. Dead last for Jimmy G. So running backs, again, let you all go first as the guest. How do you rank the running backs in the division?
Alex, you want to take this one first?
Yeah, I don't have a Cardinal in the top 4. Probably put Chris Carson 1 because he's Chris Carson when he's healthy. He's the most dynamic back in the division, in my opinion. He can run between the tackles. He can run outside. He can catch the ball out of the backfield. I'd probably put, even though he's injury riddled, I'd probably put Raheem Mostert 2, just because when he's on the field, again, he's super dynamic. And it's Seattle and San Francisco are very good in the fact that I always refer to the movie Rockstar, the Mark Wahlberg movie, where he takes over for a lead man because he knows all the songs, takes over. It doesn't matter who the lead singer is. It doesn't matter who the running back is. It's all about the run block scheme and the coach who's calling the plays. And that's the same for San Francisco and Seattle. And it has been pretty much in perpetuity over the last decade. Third, I put Cam Akers just because he's had 5 good games, even though he was a fantasy darling, probably won a lot of fantasy football leagues for people last year. And then Darrell Henderson at 4. I mean, Darrell Henderson was the belle of the ball for the first 10 weeks of last season for the Rams. Like, Chase Edmonds hasn't showed me anything yet. James Conner hasn't been healthy. So would I like to see one of the Cardinals be in the top 4? Sure. But I don't see it yet. I'd rather trust Darrell Henderson in the backfield for the Cardinals than I would Chase Edmonds or James Conner at this point, just because I haven't seen Chase Edmonds take that 1-1A role.
I'm surprised you didn't put your pre-draft boy in there, too, playing for the San Francisco 49ers, Trey Sermon. Alex loves Trey Sermon.
Oh, I do love Trey Sermon.
He's wearing the 49ers uniform.
Yeah. Not yet.
It's a murky division as far as the running backs concerned. I'm actually pretty high on Cam Akers. I'm not about to anoint him the top running back in the division, but I think he can be as high as 2. Chase Edmonds, he does. I mean, this is I don't know if the conversation between all of us becomes, who's the starting running back for the Arizona Cardinals? Is it Chase Edmonds? I mean, a lot of people are moving like he's moving forward, like he's RB1. And then, you've got James Conner, who's played 10 and 13 games respectively the last 2 seasons. Can he carry the load? Can he run in that zone run scheme? Is he fast enough to get to the corners in Cliff Kingsbury's air raid offense? I think if you're skeptical about that, you should. Is he going to be a guy that's going to, hawk some goal line carries? Absolutely. Can the Cardinals running back group, can their position group be good enough to get, what's my favorite stat, Alex? The Arizona Cardinals are 10-2 when they do what?
They run for over 150 yards.
They run for 150 yards. So it's key. It's key to get that offensive balance. And I think that if they can find it, if they can, just at least, they don't have to be the top rushing unit in the division, but they can with Kyler Murray. If they can just, have the success they had starting about halfway through Cliff Kingsbury's first season, I think they're going to be fine. As far as where the dominoes fall, where they stack up rank wise, I don't think it matters. If Chase Edmonds can rush for 600, 700 yards and James Conner can rush for another 500 and Kyler Murray can rush for another 700, you're going to be fine.
Yeah. I think Alex made a good point about San Francisco. They have the best running scheme, right? I mean, if you look at what they've done, Shanahan's brought in primarily undrafted free agents. Just some of the guys they signed. Wayne Gallman was, I think, until they drafted Trey Sermon, he was the only drafted running back on their roster.
That's what his dad's been doing. That's what Mike Shanahan would do all the time with the Broncos. I mean, he would just get one-cut guys. Terrell Davis was what, a 6th-round pick? He's a Hall of Famer. I mean, it's just that's what they do. I mean, that's what the Shanahans do.
So, like, for ranking the position groups, that was tricky for me. I actually kind of saw the 49ers running backs is kind of low, but the running game ranked high, if that makes sense, right? Because of their blocking scheme. Though, I understand why Alex is excited about Trey Sermon, and I'm high on him too, because if Shanahan actually drafts someone on day 2, right, then that's telling you something, right? So, and he does seem like a good fit for that one-cut scheme. I think I agree. Chris Carson at this point is the best, most proven running back if he can stay healthy. Right. I think the Rams, and I ranked them more as running backs on the whole roster. So for me, it was Seahawks 1, Rams 2, because of the combination of running backs. 49ers 3, I moved them up to 3. I actually had them at 4 as far as the running backs. I think those running backs in different systems aren't going to be as good. But Sermon is what bumped them up to 3 for me, because I actually think he's going to be really good. And I think 4th is the Cardinals in terms of the running backs, but I don't think there's a ton of separation. I like the Cardinals running backs. Now, as far as the split, what's that going to be? Are they going to do the traditional, early down back with James Conner and, 3rd down back with Chase Edmonds? Or are they going to do more of a split like Green Bay was doing with Jamal Williams and Aaron Jones and kind of take series? That's yet to be determined. It'll be interesting, but the thing I'm pretty certain about is they're probably going to do some kind of split that's probably somewhere in a 50-50, 60-40 split between the two, one way or the other. Now, as far as like the wide receivers, and Alex, you keep citing things you said. I remember you talked about this team as being very top heavy, and this is, I think, one of those positions where the Cardinals are quite top heavy. But how do y'all rank the receiver groups with the division?
I mean, it's tough to get away from a tandem that had over 1,000 yards and 10 touchdowns between DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett up there in Seattle. I mean, as far as competing to be wide receiver 1s, they've got a pair of them up in Seattle. So I'm going to give them the nod. And then you look at what's going on in LA. I'm a big fan of Cooper Kupp, and I'm a big fan of Robert Woods. And you try to figure out which one's the number 1 receiver. You still have, I mean, it's a great debate. And they've got they added Deshaun Watson. They added Tutu this draft. Yeah, that the haircut Mel Kiper was all excited about. It's going to be interesting. I mean, those are some pretty good wide receiver groups. I think the Arizona Cardinals talent wise, I think that they can probably get the edge because they can run route beyond the line of scrimmage, which the guys from San Francisco haven't proved that they can do so far. Look, I like Deebo Samuel. I like his toughness. Can't stay healthy, though. I mean, he's a bulldozer out there. As far as his route running ability, I think you probably want him to improve. Brandon Ayuk, we watched him play at Arizona State for a while. Very talented. But they're the Yak Bros for a reason. Yeah, they're dynamic with the ball in their hands, but as far as running routes and Jimmy G getting them the ball, I mean, that's not their offense. But as far as going out there and just the talent that the Arizona Cardinals have, whether they can tap into it outside of DeAndre Hopkins, that's the biggest question. It's not, the talent in that room. Christian Kirk needs to step up in a contract year. AJ Green, I know Alex is high on AJ Green, and I'll maybe let him talk about him. But him coming over could have a little bit of a resurgence. Could he tap into what Fitz did at his age, right around 32, 33, rediscover himself? That's interesting. And then Rondell Moore is he's a speedster. He's a game breaker. And if they can get the ball in his hands and Cliff Kingsbury can utilize him, I think this Cardinals wide receiver group can be 3rd best in this division. It's going to be tough to crack top 2, but that should be good enough when you have Nook and you have Kyler Murray throwing the football. It should be enough to get it done and compete.
Yeah. I mean, I'd probably agree. You know what? It's interesting. Seattle's got to be first. I mean, This is obviously tied to the quarterback as well. The thing with the Rams is we know what their ceiling is, and we don't know what the Cardinals' ceiling is. DeAndre Hopkins is the best receiver in football, in my opinion. I thought that before he came to the Cardinals. When I remember the day, I've never swore so many times in a row on the phone with somebody when I called Bo when we found out that DeAndre Hopkins was coming to Arizona, and it wasn't just a lottery pick or a draft pick dump to get rid of David Johnson's full contract. DeAndre Hopkins is the best receiver in football, and I don't think it's close. He's not flashy, but he's the number one guy in football. AJ Green, I think, will have a pseudo career renaissance. And what I mean by that is maybe 65 to 75% of what he was in 2018 when he had a really good year. Like, I remember he balled out. I think it was 2018 on Thursday Night Football, 200 yards, 2 touchdowns. Like, the dude knows how to play football. He knows how to run routes. He's got great hands. He's 6'4". He can play outside. He can play inside. He runs every route in the route tree, and he's a great red zone threat. Rondale Moore is going to be the X factor, but I think that not knowing what the ceiling is for the Cardinals and definitely knowing what the ceiling is for the Rams, regardless of quarterback, I would give the Cardinals a Kyler Murray over Matthew Stafford edge as 2A, just because DeAndre Hopkins is the best. You know, that outweighs it. And AJ Green, he's not 50. You know, he's not 50. The dude can still play. So, yeah, I put him at 2. And then the 49ers, they have like 7 running backs and George Kittle that they throw out there. So Bo was talking about Yak Bros. If you ever want to hear Bo yak any sort of loathing for a NFL franchise, asking about Kyle Shanahan and the 49ers is pretty awesome.
Nice.
Best part of my day whenever we talk about it.
Well, I mean, Shanahan, you know, for a coach who doesn't have very many winning records, he certainly gets a lot of attaboys in the league.
One
right?
out of 4 years. One.
Right. Well, and it feels like the 49ers as a team, there's so many players on that team even that you know, they talk about all those receivers, you know, Ayuk and Deebo Samuel, but none of them have really put together anything consistently yet. Some of them are very young, but you know, they're getting a lot of praise that they haven't earned yet, right? As a team and individual players with a few exceptions. Yeah, I think I completely agree that Nuke is the best receiver in the division. Seattle has the best 1 and 2 combo, right? The best number 2 receiver is certainly another way you could put it. Although I think the Rams, it's close when you look at Cooper Kupp and Robert Wood. Interesting. So if you look at starting receivers, the argument for Seattle I think is very strong. But if you look at full receiver depth chart, or I should say full receiver room, they don't really have anyone after those 2 guys. Right, if you look at it on the roster, those 2 guys took a majority of the snaps last year, or the guys that are still on the roster, I should say, this year. They don't have many guys that had very many snaps or looks last year. So it's too deep, and then a lot of nothing there in Seattle. Now, you don't need to play 5 receivers to do well, so that 2 is enough to be very good. But if I think if you're looking at the full receiver room. And this I get that some people might scoff at this. I would actually put the Cardinals number 1, and I know that's probably not a conventional take. Nuke is clearly the best receiver. AJ Green, I agree, he's still got some things left. I think he's a better version of what Fitz has been recently. He's going to be that red zone target. He's going to be that guy that moves the chains. I did a video recently where I actually looked at every one of his targets last year and looked at what I saw good and bad and otherwise. He couldn't get open against man deep, but what he could do was find soft spots in the zone. He made contested catches. They did a lot of short slants with him, and he caught a lot of those. And I think what you're going to see from him, he's not going to put up necessarily really big numbers, but he's going to get them first downs when they need them desperately. And I think that's what we're going to see. And I also think, when you look at Kyler Murray, his biggest weakness was in terms of passing was the intermediate range, and I think Green's ability to find those soft spots in the zone might help with that, right? And that alone, even if he doesn't put up 1,000 yards, even if it's 500, 600 yards and 7 or 8 touchdowns, the types of plays he's going to make and where those yards are going to come, I think could make a really big difference for this offense. But yeah, San Francisco's receivers, I agree with you. You got to put them really low, and it's tough. The top 3, it depends on whether you want to go depth or just look at the top 2. I will say Tutu Atwell. As a Cardinals fan, I saw too much of J.J. Nelson to be interested in a guy like that. I know some people had mocked him to the Cardinals, and I was really glad when the Rams took him and not the Cardinals in the draft. But to the next group of pass catchers, tight ends, this one I think there's a pretty clear answer who's number one, and from there might be a little bit of disagreements, but I think this one is probably pretty clear. But I'll let you guys go with the tight ends where you think they rank.
Yeah, the Cardinals are NA, so I think we're only.
I think he's talking about the Austrian player that they brought over. Isn't he number one?
We're not talking rugby here, bro. Come on. It's George Kittle, and it's Gerald Everett, and it's whoever the Rams have a tight end, and then the Cardinals aren't allowed in this game. Yeah, do not pass go. Do not collect 200 tight end dollars.
Arnold Schwarzenegger, what's his name? The kid from Austria. Who is he?
Probably not Arnold Schwarzenegger. You got against Arnold Schwarzenegger.
You've got an Austrian. You've got a power forward from Penn State, and what was his? Is it Ross? What was his name? We talked about him a little bit. Oh man, it escapes me. And then you've got Max Williams, who's a great. This is where the Cardinals they have the best blocking tight end in the division. That's where I'll give their credit.
Yeah, Ross Travis.
They qualify. Yeah, Ross Travis. Thank you. I mean, Max Williams deserves to be in the conversation just because of his blocking prowess. I mean, he's a guy that, when they were averaging 5 yards a carry at the end of the first season with Kyler Murray and Cliff Kingsbury, he's a big reason for that. And Max Williams missed some time last year. And I think that if he can stay healthy, if he can start the season healthy, it's going to be key for the Arizona Cardinals. But as far as playmakers, they just don't have any. And that's why they're going to finish at the bottom as far as preseason rankings. Gerald Everett in Seattle, decent. And then, I think that I like Tyler Higbee. I think he's good. He's killed the Cardinals in his career. And I think that those are three guys that are going to be ahead of whoever the Cardinals put out there, whether it's Ross Travis, whether it's they make a deal for a tight end. I don't know. Maybe they sign Tim Tebow when he inevitably gets released.
Right.
Be an upgrade.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty clear Kittle, San Francisco is number one because of Kittle, and they've got some decent depth. Seattle, I think the Rams are ahead. Gerald Everett's solid, and, Tyler Higbee's good. I think you could make an argument one way or the other between those two. I lean towards the Rams, but and then the Cardinals are clearly third. But Max Williams, as you noted, really good blocking tight end, but they just don't use a tight end for receiving a lot. Even Dan Arnold lined up as a slot receiver a lot, even when he was here. And I think a lot of those, people are there's a lot of gnashing of teeth about not signing a tight end. And I still think they might bring someone in, but it won't be a big name. But I think what you're going to see is a lot of those slot routes that went to Dan Arnold might go to someone like AJ Green, just that big receiver playing inside a little bit. But yeah, I agree with your rankings as far as the tight ends go. This one is one I think.
I honestly don't understand the reluctance in the organization historically to invest in the tight end position. It really doesn't make sense. How much time
you got?
Yeah, right.
When you talk about the best seasons for a tight end in the Arizona Cardinals history since they moved to the desert, you can't find anybody over 500 yards.
Yeah.
You can't find anybody that scored more than 5 touchdowns. Like, some of the greatest seasons by a tight end was Freddie Jones back in the early 2000s. It's been that long. Talk about GOAT tight ends for the organization like Leonard Pope or Rob Hausler, guys that have no business even being in that conversation. That's how futile the position has been since they moved to Arizona.
Like quarterbacks.
Well,
up until 10 years ago.
At least they had a couple cups of coffee with Warner.
15 years ago, I should say, with Warner. Yeah.
Yeah, so with tight ends, what's interesting about that long-term history is, when people start talking about long trends, I don't always put a lot of credit or credence to that because you're got different general managers, different coaching staffs. So it's interesting that it's gone that long. I just wondered, have we had coaching staffs that de-emphasize a tight end just all that time, or have our GMs just from a roster building perspective decided that position wasn't worth it? I don't know, right? But it's odd that they haven't had even one tight end that even sniffed a Pro Bowl appearance. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, they got to change that.
Yeah, offensive line. So how do you rank the different offensive line groups in the division?
I mean, I was looking at it. I think that the Arizona Cardinals have one of the better units in the league. One, because of how they played last year, and it might not have been a statistical, rated darling, but I thought that they were consistent enough. They had there was continuity across the offensive line, and the addition of Rodney Hudson gives them the ability in 2021 to be the top group in the division. Now, if you look at like the Pro Football ratings or whatever, Pro Football Focus ratings, it might tell you a different story. But I watched this team, and I watched Kelvin Beachum and I watched DJ Humphries hold down the bookends there for the tackle positions. And I think that as far as Justin Pugh's concerned, and whoever wins the right guard position, whether it's Brian Winters or Justin Murray, or hopefully Josh Jones emerges as a candidate, I think that those are some serviceable options. And then Rodney Hudson's an absolute stud. So I like their offensive line. Trent Williams is obviously probably the best player in the division on the O-line, but he's an injury risk. I watched him in his entire career in Washington. He had a tough time putting together entire seasons, and he's getting long in the tooth. So, Mike McGlinchey's good in San Francisco, but I think as far as just a whole cohesive group, I'll take the Cardinals over any of these teams, especially Seattle's.
Yeah, I agree. It's been an interesting plight for the offensive line since Kyler's been there. I've said since day one, and I still say this, the best offensive line the Arizona Cardinals have, the best offensive lineman the Arizona Cardinals have is Kyler Murray's legs. And that's what it's going to be. So when you look at Bo and I kind of differ a little bit on this. We kind of disagree a little bit. I think that the, very positive ranking, the very positive outlook on the Arizona Cardinals for the first 10 weeks of last season was solely predicated upon Kyler Murray being able to run the ball. And then it completely changed. So that's not taking away 100% of what DJ Humphries and Kelvin Beachum specifically did, because Kelvin Beachum has been a godsend. I mean, you brought him in. This is what Andre Smith was supposed to be a couple years ago. And he, obviously that didn't work out for Steve Keim. The Steve Keim special. Justin Pugh's still here. And Kelvin Beachum now re-signed for 1 year, $2 million. That's the steal of the offseason. That's the complete steal of the offseason. Now they have their spine in Rodney Hudson. That's what I call him in the middle of the offensive line. It's going to make Justin Pugh and Justin Murray's job a lot easier. But really, what makes everybody on that offensive line look better is that that Kyler Murray's not Jared Goff. He's not Tom Brady. He's not a guy that's just going to stand there. And you have to protect him for 4 or 5 seconds if there's nobody downfield that's open. Kyler Murray's out 2.5 seconds. I'm gone, man. And that makes all those rankings skyrocket because there's no pressures, there's no sacks, there's no quarterback hits because Kyler's a ghost. So I think it's a mixture of a lot of things. I do think that the Cardinals have the best offensive line in the NFC West. Seattle's is putrid. The Rams' journey offensive line is just like the Cowboys. Like a couple years ago, Andrew Whitworth he's rewritten the script on how old you have to be a left tackle. I mean, what is he, 37, and he's still a top 6, top 7 left tackle? But they are getting older, and Rodney Hudson's 32. He's looked at as the elder statesman on the offensive line for the Cardinals. So I put the Cardinals at 1. And I'd probably put the Rams at 2, or the San Francisco at 2, Rams at 3, and Seattle at 4.
Yeah, I think with the Rams and the Cardinals and the 49ers, there's kind of a logjam. They're all three of those are really good offensive lines. I looked at the PFF rankings and kind of weighted it for snaps and did kind of a little bit of number crunching, and they were all really close. I had it as with the Rams number 1, 49ers number 2, and Cardinals number 3, but it's so close that really they're just all kind of neck and neck in my view. But the Seahawks were clearly the number 4. But I think one thing that's interesting in that you could pose as an argument for why the Cardinals offensive line might be better than the rating, the PFF grades actually indicate. PFF grades based on what was expected of the player in the play, and did they exceed? Did they perform really well? What was expected or poorly? So a lot of plays end up with that kind of neutral grade of you did your job, but you didn't do something exceptional. And one of the things people talked about with Cliff Kingsbury's offense, for all the legitimate reasons one might critique his offense, is spreading things out. He creates a lot of really good running lanes, for those running backs, right? With those 4 wide receiver sets, not as many people in the box. And I think what might be happening in those grades and why the Cardinals grades might not be as high as what the eye test is showing you is because he's setting up for them easier jobs. So like those offensive linemen aren't doing this crazy better than expected their job. They're doing their job, but their job was kind of easy based on that spread setup they had, right? So I wonder, and someone with much more time with the data would have to get into this, but I wonder if that's part of the reason their rankings in terms of PFF grades aren't higher than what they are. But yeah, watching the games, I mean, and as Cardinals fans, we're used to having putrid offensive lines. To actually have an offensive line that's worth mentioning in the top third, top quarter, maybe even top 5 in the league if they live up to what we hope is something we're not used to, right? But yeah, I think Rodney Hudson's the key. He could be what they call a force multiplier, right? You get that guy in the middle, and he makes everyone better across that line just by what he does in terms of all the things that a center does for an offensive line. So I'm really excited to see how they improve with a legitimate center on that line this year. As far as now the defensive line, I'm dividing this up by interior defensive line and then edge rushers. And they play that 3-4, but also the base nickel that most teams end up playing out of. So it gets a little dicey for the purposes of this. Now PFF has Jordan Phillips and JJ Watt as edge rushers. Jordan Phillips is too big to be an edge rusher. JJ Watt, they move them all across. For the purposes of this discussion, I'd like to consider Phillips a defensive interior, Watt an edge rusher, even though they are going to move them all around that line. So in terms of the interior defensive line, how do you rate the position groups in the division?
I'm going to put the 49ers first. I mean, even though Javon Kinlaw is a huge step back from where DeForest Buckner was, moving him along the field, moving him across the line, I give them a slight edge just because, and again, maybe I should rethink this because Robert Saleh's not there anymore.
The greatest.
Did Aaron Donald retire?
But interior, like Aaron Donald, he's not a nose tackle.
No, but he's interior defensive lineman. Though.
Yeah, okay, fine. So I was going to switch it immediately. Thank you, bro. I'm really happy to get a fact checker. So the 49ers or the Rams you'll put there, but I think San Francisco is close. It's their lines are very strong. There are a lot of first round picks on those lines, and again, moving Nick Bosa around, he's an edge rusher, but he's also hand in the dirt. So it's confusing at times. But I would put regardless. I think the Cardinals are third, and you put Seattle fourth. So you put the Rams 1, but I don't think the 49ers are that far off just because Aaron Donald is on the Rams.
Yeah, I think the Arizona Cardinals still lack the beef that you need at the nose tackle, the interior spot of the defensive line. Like to see them maybe between now and training camp or preseason or just the start of the 2021 season beef up. It's going to be important for them. Jordan Phillips, yeah, you know what you like what you see when he's out there, but that's a big. We dealt with a weird season, a COVID season. He lost his father, dealt with injuries. It was a rough year for Jordan Phillips coming over from Buffalo with 9.5 sacks. You know what he's capable, but we were told by on Bill host Joe Marino that he's a rotation guy. You can't. That's what. When you have Aaron Donald, that's what most of the NFL is doing. That's the trend. You have a nice rotation going there. Rashad Lawrence, Lecky Fotu. We saw those guys play, some snaps in their rookie seasons, fourth rounders. You contributed more than some of the earlier picks for the Arizona Cardinals. I think that the Arizona Cardinals, they just have some guys, and that can get you as high as 3, and it can put you at the bottom of the division. It's LA's. I'm not a big Javon Kinlaw fan, as a lot of people. He's certainly not DeForest Buckner, and we still haven't really seen Nick Bosa play on a line without DeForest Buckner, even though everybody's wanting to crown him as one of the best defensive players in the league.
Yeah. When I looked at the PFF grades and kind of weighted them for snap counts and everything, Rams were, head and shoulders above everyone. I mean, it wasn't even close. I think their average PFF grade for the position, again, weighted by snaps, was like 82.8, and the next best was 65. And so doing that analysis, Seattle actually came out second, at least based on the PFF grading. Poona Ford rated pretty high for them, took a lot of snaps. But they didn't have as deep a rotation of guys as San Francisco did as well, though. So, for me, it was Rams, Seattle, San Francisco, and the Cardinals was fourth. Jordan Phillips, he had, that 9.5 sack season for Buffalo when they signed him as a free agent, but he's never graded well PFF grades. And you just wonder how much of that was fluky. I'm sorry.
Right. It's the Bill Barnwell had the same. He was very critical of the signing of Jordan Phillips. But what
I the price point, because they gave him a lot of money.
$10 million.
Outside the kind of box thinking as far as trying to free up the money to sign him and what Keim did there. He's very critical of it. But when I saw him, especially early in the season against San Francisco, that he's a solid player. I don't know. You're not going to go find Pro Bowlers on the free agent market. I mean, this offseason you might have, but this was, an anomaly. I think the Arizona Cardinals, I don't mind Jordan Phillips as a rotational guy. Zach Allen, for defensive end, I think that he needs to take a step, a guy that they were excited about out of Boston College. So, we'll see. I mean, it's the Rams and everybody else.
Yeah. And this is one of those positions in general where you have a few stars and just a lot of, like you talked about, they rotate guys in, right? And, the Cardinals have a lot of those guys. And I'm with you. I think Phillips is fine as a rotation guy. They pay too much for him, but as a player, he's not bad, right? Now, the edge rushers, I think this one gets maybe a little more interesting. It's not necessarily one than everyone else on this position, although I think there's probably one group that falls at the bottom. But how do you rank the edge rushing groups?
Are we counting Jamal Adams as an edge rusher for the Seahawks?
Right. Led the team in. Yeah,
they've got Carlos Dunlap, but I don't know if that. Look, it's a tough division, and you look at San Francisco, and you look at what the Rams can do. Leonard Floyd got paid this offseason, but the Arizona Cardinals are the premier edge rushing group, even with Hassan Reddick exiting for not a lucrative, but 1 year, $8 million in Carolina to reunite with his college coach. J.J. Watt, Chandler Jones, nightmare fuel. You've got the efficiency of Dennis Gardeck, your special teams ace in there, who, what do you have, 7.5 sacks and under 100 attempts. It's a good unit. It's solid. And they saw, even without the stars there last year, that they could get to the quarterback enough. But I'm interested to see, the non-sexy numbers. I'm interested to see J.J. Watt bat some balls down. I'm interested to see all, the disruption that 99 can bring. And then he's brought in Houston the last couple seasons. That's going to be fun. Hopefully it's going to create more turnovers in the secondary. I'm excited about this front seven, and J.J. Watt and Chandler Jones are the main reasons for that.
Yeah. And I mean, I think, as Bo mentioned, he kind of took the words out of my mouth a little bit. Hopefully it'll open up some holes for Isaiah Simmons. Isaiah Simmons is an absolute cannon. He's a missile, and he just needs to be unleashed. We saw, and Bo brought up, I don't know why this came into his cerebellum, but he comped Isaiah Simmons to Bobby Boucher. And it's actually spot on. So I was like, that's interesting. You're an idiot, but it's interesting. It's like the hit that Isaiah Simmons put on Cam Newton in New England that ended up being a 15-yard penalty. Nick Folk kicked the field goal. The Cardinals lost that game. That was a Bobby Boucher hit. Okay. Isaiah Simmons has that in his rep. He's 6'3", 240, sub 4'5". What is it? Sub 440. The dude is an absolute machine ready to be utilized. And the reason why I bring it up is hopefully they will learn from the Hassan Reddick journey where, hey, maybe we don't have to wait 3 years to put him in his natural position. Sure, Isaiah Simmons has many different positions that are quote-unquote natural to him when he plays, 2 good teams in his whole college career at Clemson, where he's just mauling kids that have to go to French class the next day. But we've seen enough from him to where he could definitely be an outside/edge rusher type if used in the right scheme by Vance Joseph. So I'm going to put the Cardinals at 1 just because until Chandler Jones doesn't do it, I'm going to say that he's going to do it. And if J.J. Watt, as Bo mentioned, can just mucky it up, just make offensive linemen look the other way. Look at me, and just be able to go on the weak side and hit the quarterback that way. I still put the Cardinals reign supreme from the edge rusher position going into 2021 for sure.
Yeah, and I think when your third best, arguably edge rusher has a 10-sack season in his career, Marcus Golden, right? That says something, right? And he's number 3, right? And then Vance Joseph likes to scheme up those blitzes with the inside linebackers. We'll probably see Zaven Collins get some sacks, Isaiah Simmons. You mentioned Dennis Gardeck. I like to do a fun fact, and the fun fact actually is about Dennis Gardeck. So now, small sample size, it's not something he could continue to do. But in 2020, as we all know, he had 7 sacks, and those were in 79 pass rush snaps. That was 1 sack per every 11.3 rush snaps. Now, you compare that to Hassan Reddick, who led the team in sacks last year. He had 12.5 and 4 and 12 pass rush snaps. That's 1 sack every 33 pass rush snaps. So if he had maintained that pace over the same amount of snaps, that's 36.5 sacks for Dennis Gardeck. Now, obviously, he's not going to do that. But that shows you what an outlier that performance was. And I know people love, I've been a Arizona sports fan, and you know how it is, that overachiever, that fans in Arizona love that guy. That guy's been on the Suns before. He's been on the Cardinals. Right now it's Dennis Gardeck. That 7 sacks performance, I don't think is repeatable, but it was a great story. But who knows, right? I'm sorry.
He doesn't have to repeat a 7.5 sack season. I mean, what he was doing was supplementing the pass rush while Chandler Jones was limited to just 5 games last year.
He's got a great sack dance. I mean, he makes Chandler Jones's guitar just bury that.
Right.
The 8-year-old dance move at your 5th grade dance or whatever. I'm in for that.
Yeah, right.
And we didn't even mention Devon Kennard. I don't know what his deal is with the organization up and down season. Detroit released him for a reason. I don't know if they're going to rely on it. I don't know if he's going to make this roster. But even if they don't have Kennard, a guy that was a bigger signing an offseason ago, it would be interesting if he could make a couple.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they've got a lot of depth there, that's for sure. I think if Nick Bosa is healthy, San Francisco's clearly number 2 in my book. If he's healthy, almost by him alone, but they have a few other guys. It's tough between the Seahawks and the Rams in terms of edge rushers. Like you mentioned, they have Carlos Dunlap and they have Benson Mayowa in Seattle. Leonard Floyd, he's okay. I think for me, I think I went with Seattle 3, Rams 4, but flip a coin for me on those 2 teams. In terms of off-ball linebackers, how do you rank those position groups in the division?
That's a pretty loaded position.
Yeah. I mean, it's so difficult. Like, I know that technically Bobby Wagner is an on-ball, but Bobby Wagner is everywhere. Jamal Adams, we talk about Jamal Adams again. Like, because there's so much amoeba-like movement with Seattle, it's kind of difficult. Fred Warner's kind of the same way, where he's a strong side guy, but Fred Warner is the second best linebacker in the division behind Bobby Wagner still. So I would put the Cardinals probably last because of the I mean, they're kids. I mean, are you going to pick Zaven Collins to be off ball? Are you going to pick Isaiah Simmons to be off ball? I mean, it's a lose-lose proposition at this point for the Cardinals. So I think due to lack of experience, you put the Cardinals in the cellar. I would put the Rams probably at 3rd. And then just because of what Seattle does, where they move guys, they'll Jimmy Johnson it, move safeties in the linebacker position, I would probably put Seattle at 1 and San Francisco at 2.
Yeah, it's You can't get away from Seattle and what their linebacking core looks like, even with who knows what's going to happen with KJ Wright. San Francisco absolutely up there. And then the Arizona Cardinals, as Cliff Kingsbury called it, it's pretty, but is it good? Is it going to be, is it going to impact? I hope so. I mean, I hope it's the future of, linebacking cores in the NFL. Looks like Zaven Collins is going to be your starting Mike. Looks like Isaiah Simmons in his second season is going to be your Mo. And, right. Hopefully it's not anymore. He won't start going 70 yards to the house like game one. But we saw Isaiah Simmons in the limited snaps that he took. He can make an impact. I'm just excited to see it kind of play out. I'm excited to see him get on the field over 50% of the snaps and just see what this thing could be.
Yeah, what we do know quickly is this has never worked. It's never happened, and it's never worked because it's never happened. Having a 6'3" and a 6'5" guys are inside linebackers. Never happened. Guys are normally smaller. Mm-hmm. So we'll see if Steve Keim is the biggest genius on the planet or if he's still the most stubborn person on the planet, which is pretty much what's happened since his tenure here.
Yeah. Yeah, I was torn on Seattle, San Francisco, with the KJ Wright situation. That's the big question there. In terms of the numbers, the PFF grades, weighted and everything, Seattle came out ahead. I think I leaned towards San Francisco first because their number 2 linebacker in terms of guy with most snaps was better than who Seattle had, but you could go either way with those two. It's really close. The thing I think I disagree with both of you on is the Rams. Their inside linebackers really graded very poorly. I mean, they had a guy whose PFF grade, Kenny Young, 38.1, and he had 538 snaps. That's a lot of snaps from a guy with a really poor grade. Their best guy, Troy Reeder, 61.3 grade, 556 snaps. We'll see though. You're right in that the Cardinals have 2 young linebackers, so that's we'll see what happens with that. If Jordan Hicks is still on the roster, there's still uncertainty what's going on there. I did put the Cardinals ahead though because at least based on the grades and everything, the Rams linebackers it was kind of rough. But those rookie when you got a rookie and a second-year linebacker, if they're starting, that could get ugly very quick as well. So could see it going either way. And you talked about obviously the how the safeties come into play with that, with all the kind of hybrid and virtual or various ways that defense are configured. So we'll see. As far as the cornerbacks go, how do you rank the cornerback position in this division?
Jalen Ramsey, is that it?
Yeah, I mean Jason Verrett with the seriously. Luckily, the Cardinals, it's the worst position for the Cardinals. Even worse. Tight end, but it doesn't really count because that's obviously a conscious decision you'd hope, and the offseason isn't over yet. But the Cardinals are set with Malcolm Butler being their CB1, and it's kind of not that far behind the curve if the cornerback's not named Jalen Ramsey. This is a safety division. This isn't a cornerback division. This is probably the best safety division in football by eons, and I know we'll get there, so I'm not going to jump onto it. But, I would probably – the Rams are first, and they're running unopposed. I would be hard-pressed to think the Cardinals would be that far behind. Jason Verrett was looked at – where did he come out of TCU?
Yep.
I think the Chargers drafted him, right? So he was looked at as the all-world dude, just like oh my goodness gracious! Just like the guy from VCU who was drafted by the Browns, who was supposed to be this all-world guy that didn't really come to fruition. The Cardinals aren't that far behind, but I would probably put Malcolm Butler with his stability probably second. I guess the 49ers third. No. 49ers. Wait, where am I at? No, Seattle. Yeah, I would put Seattle last because name a Seattle corner. I just looked it up. I don't name one. Quentin Dunbar's not there anymore. Richard Sherman's not there anymore, obviously. Name one because I can't until I looked it up.
Right. Yeah, Sherman's not even rostered anymore. He's still trying to find a good deal for himself to sign. Jason Verrett did go back to San Francisco. But yeah, it's Jalen Ramsey. I think Troy Hill, the loss of him going to the Cleveland Browns on a decent deal, kind of takes away from their cornerback room. But like I think the Arizona Cardinals can be the status quo as far as the secondary is concerned from last year to this year, and it was a decent cornerback room. Malcolm Butler, probably you give him a little bit of an edge over Patrick Peterson. I mean, if you just look at how he performed, I'll take Malcolm Butler at this point. But you're looking for this is what I believe. This is that the Arizona Cardinals feel content with their cornerback room. They're not approaching any other way. Like they think Robert Alford, even though he's missed back-to-back seasons,
Right,
the guy that's going to be able to play for them this season, even though it's, the theory of insanity. It's like expecting different results and doing the same thing. Byron Murphy needs to take a big jump. And then, I think that you've got some other pieces around there, but the good thing is the rest of the division is just as hurting as bad as they are, but they actually look like they're in good shape compared to Seattle, where Dunbar exited, where Shaq Griffin goes and signs with Jacksonville on a lucrative deal. So they should be okay. And it's kind of the trend not to spend too much money outside of your top CB1.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the Rams are clearly number one. And when you look at the numbers reflect that. Not just Ramsey. You've got Darius Williams, who graded very well for them. Just purely on the numbers, in terms of average PFF grade, again, weighted for snaps, San Francisco was number 2 at 69.2, but Arizona's at 69.0. So it's right there, right? And then Seattle's dead last. You're right. They're hurting.
Keep in mind, the Niners and the Cardinals and the Rams, Seattle was atrocious last year in the secondary. And Alex points this out, the quarterbacks they played last year, most of these teams played, they weren't that great. Horrible. So decent cornerback play, that's expected. If you've got guys that are serviceable starters, they shouldn't have a problem slowing down some of the worst collection of signal callers we've seen throughout a 16-game schedule.
Yeah. Now, one thing, I actually talk about the cornerback position in my most recent video. One thing where the Cardinals upgraded significantly was in terms of drawing penalties. Patrick Peterson led all cornerbacks with 12 penalties last year.
Shaka.
Yeah, right. I know. And then, Dre Kirkpatrick was tied for third with 9
wow.
last year. Yeah. And if you look at it, Malcolm Butler had 2 flags thrown, and he was the number 1 most targeted cornerback in the NFL. Now, that might be a problem in and of itself, but in the most targets, he had 2. Now, in a typical season, he might draw about 5. He had a really good season. Darqueze Dennard, I think, is a really interesting player in this because he's played both slot and outside. If Alford doesn't pan out, I could see him actually playing on that outside spot, or if they decide to move Murphy, there's been some talk of that outside. Dennard could be really good in that slot position, but he's graded pretty well. And he has 7 penalties his entire career, Darqueze Dennard. So now Alford drew a lot of penalties so that he would be kind of a flag machine. But however it pans out, they're going to be likely far improved in terms of not having those costly PI flags in the game. So that alone, I think, makes a big difference in terms of game flow.
Me spiking my remote too. I mean, that's going to save on, my
right.
Not getting beat up through the entire season because it was so frustrating. That and Mason Cole turning his head, for God's sake. We're not going to see that at the center position. And then look, if one of those rookies pops, if one of those guys, if Marco Wilson or Tay Gowan can play, a decent amount of snaps and make an impact, and there's hype around him. I think a lot of people love Tay Gowan out of UCF in the 6th round. If one of those guys can be a player, it'll be huge for the Cardinals.
Yeah, I really like this cornerback room in terms of decent players for now and some good guys for development. But again, the Rams are the class of the division in that position. But I like where they're at. In terms of safeties, how do you rank that position in the division?
It's so unfair.
Go ahead.
I mean, Budda Baker's arguably the best defensive player the Cardinals have, and they're probably 3rd. Like what the Rams did. So letting Josh Johnson walk was kind of surprising to me. I know that they're in cap hell, yet they still are able to add players. The Rams are. So them losing their free safety there was difficult. But you look at Seattle with Quandre Diggs and Jamal Adams. I mean, they're first. They're the best safety crew in the NFC West. The interesting part is Jaquiski Tart and Jimmy Ward with San Francisco. Obviously, injury concerns. Tart has been good when he's good, but he's kind of been a little inconsistent. Jalen Thompson's been injured. Like, Jalen Thompson is a great backup dancer, but after Jalen Thompson, you're looking at Chris Banjo and 19 other safeties the Cardinals signed this offseason. Mm-hmm. So, again, you're looking a little top-heavy with Budda Baker. And I would put the Rams fourth because Josh Johnson is no longer with them. So I'm going Seattle, probably San Francisco slightly outranking the Cardinals, Budda Baker and Jalen Thompson 3, and the Rams at 4.
It's not bad. I think you make a good point.
It's close.
As far as Seattle, yeah. I mean, I think they're the top. Quandre Diggs was a great acquisition. What it cost him, like a 5th-round pick? That's absurd from Detroit.
That's what they do.
But, yeah, Budda Baker, Jalen Thompson has potential. I do like that they've put themselves in a position to where they won't be where they were in Carolina in week 3 last year, where they just didn't have any depth. I think that they're serviceable guys. But as far as your 2 starters, they're really good. Budda Baker, if it weren't for Jamal Adams, probably the premier safety in the division. He deserves a lot more respect than what they call him the 16th best safety in the league. I think he's a guy that's going to crack probably the top 5 if he hasn't already. He's a playmaker now. He was a guy we were waiting until last year for his first career interception. He made it, and then he made another one. It was overshadowed by a wide receiver that tracked him down. I love Budda Baker. I think he makes the Cardinals safety room one of the best, if not in the division, but in the league. And then, Taylor Rapp, isn't he in LA? And then I'm not too high on them, but they're decent. But they're a product of that front 7. And I think San Francisco benefits from that as well. Where Seattle, they ask a ton out of their safeties, and they have to because they've invested heavily, especially in Jamal Adams, or they're going to.
Yeah, Jamal Adams had, for all the numbers he put up in terms of the sacks, at least in his grade, PFF grade, he had one of his worst seasons, but don't expect that to happen. There's probably a lot of adjusting to the system. I think strong argument for Seattle's number 1. Though I would put the Cardinals pretty firmly number 2, and in the PFF grade, again, I know that's not everything, but the average grading, Cardinals actually were number 1, but that was large part because Adams had such a bad PFF grade. So, when you take everything into account, though, I think you still have to put Seattle ahead because that was an anomaly for Jamal Adams in terms of his performance. But the thing about the Cardinals, I think, that we sometimes maybe don't appreciate is they actually have a pretty deep safety room. And I know, Charles Washington, Chris Banjo, we didn't like seeing those guys out there as much as we did, but like Chris Banjo's PFF grade wasn't that bad. It was pretty decent. It was in the mid 60s. Sean Williams is a guy who's, played a lot of good football in his career, and he's a depth guy, and then obviously if Jalen Thompson can stay healthy, he's very promising. And then we know what Budda Baker brings. But yeah, I think probably Seattle number 1, Arizona number 2 for me, and then 49ers and the Rams. And it's pretty close between those 2. So yeah, that was a marathon. We got through all the positions. I don't want to keep
kickers and punters.
Yeah, right. Special teams, kickers and punters. Yeah, punters are people too. Kickers are people too. So we'll pass on those guys unless you really are angling to talk about them.
Bo's the punter of our podcast. I think that's why he's partial to it.
Right. Well, listen, I really appreciate you guys being here. I really appreciate talking, getting to talk Cardinals with you guys, going through this marathon, position group by position group. Is there anything y'all want to say to the folks that are watching and that will watch later before we let you go for the night? And I know, Bo, you got a baby there, and God bless you on that.
No, man, Joseph, we appreciate you having us here on the Cardinal Rule. We're new to YouTube as well. We'd appreciate anybody who wanted to check out our channel, subscribe, leave a comment on our videos. We like to obviously keep that conversation going. We're just growing, along with everybody that's creating content for Cardinals football. This is a great community to be a part of, and we're just grateful to be a part of it as well. Locked On Cardinals. That's where you can find us on YouTube. Find us on Twitter at LockedOnAZ. Alex at Clancy's Corner. He's verified now. He's told anybody that will listen that he's got a blue check mark. I'm sick of hearing about it. And you can follow me at BOBRACK. But Alex is a great follow. I kid, but he's a fun follow for sure.
Yeah, we have a good time. So I appreciate it. Joseph, I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. All right, well, we're gonna end the broadcast. Thanks everyone for watching, and we'll see you next time on the Cardinal Rule.